Whoever continues to use AI to write me emails, I block them now because they're exhausting. There are some third-party vendors who send out not just constant contact communication, but daily, did you see this? Did you see that I have toothbrushes and that they're $2? And you need toothbrushes because I know you brush your teeth. It's like that level of incredibly invasive and pervasive communication that's a big turnoff. So if you want to know what not to do, that is item number one.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Multifamily Hangout. I'm your host, Adrian Danila, and we're excited to have you back here. I want to start by thanking our sponsors from Kairos and Coastal Painting Contractors for making this broadcast possible. With this being said, I want to turn it over to my co-host, Chris Moreno. Take it away, sir.
Awesome. Thank you, Adrian. And awesome today. We've got two of us majorly remote. Thank you, Lisa, for joining us from the job in Florida. But so excited to have Lisa Gunderson, the Vice President of Asset Management at Bristol Development. She's normally out of Nashville, Tennessee, and love her experience. She just brings a wealth of knowledge of strategic planning, operating performance, financial success, has it all. She's a jack of all trades, really can go deep on development, assets, operations, technology. Love her experience and when she talks and goes deep on the reality of what's happening at properties in multifamily. So she's managed billions of dollars of assets. If you haven't met Lisa, you gotta meet her because she knows all the way from DC down to Florida and everywhere in between, has seen it all. So really excited to have her today to go a little bit deeper. So thank you, Lisa, for joining us for the first time on the pod.
My pleasure. Great, glad to be here.
Awesome. Well, first off, want to dive in, can you share a little bit about your early career and maybe how you fell into real estate? What was kind of your first role that you got into and that got you excited about being in multifamily?
Sure. So I'm going to start at the beginning, which is before I got into the apartment business. I was in the zoo business, which is why I think I was incredibly prepared to get into the apartment business. I had worked at large theme parks like Busch Gardens that has a large animal concentration, and ultimately graduated into a leadership operations role at what is now known as the Tampa Zoo, and was managing my career there when I fell into, as we always do in our business, an apartment opportunity as an assistant manager on 900 units undergoing a $5 million rehab. And the reason that nobody from the industry would take this job was because it only paid $10 an hour. Which was slightly more money than I was making at the zoo and had better hours. So that is what launched me into what I call my trial by fire in operations. As the woman that I worked for was bi-coastal. She lives 2 weeks out of the month in California and 2 weeks on this rehab reposition in Tampa. And so I learned all kinds of things, and that began my journey into operations, property management.
Lisa, let's continue your journey. How did your career evolve, your journey? Tell us a little bit about what you're doing in your current position, how much ground you cover geographically.
Sure, absolutely. So from my beginning in operations, I grew into different roles, multi-site manager, regional manager, and I met my husband at the corporate office where our headquarters was based in Nashville. That is what got me to move from Tampa to Nashville, and was managing real estate there, eventually became a regional manager, and was mentored by our CEO. He was actually my asset manager. So I would review the financial statements with him at the end of every month. And he began to sort of explain to me, as he would say, the value of a $5 increase was more to him than just $5 a month. And he had come out of a banking background, and he began to sort of help me understand the financial piece a little bit better. And I said, I'm fascinated by this. I can manage so much better if I understand what the goals and objectives are. How do I learn more about this? And how do I become an asset manager? I wasn't asking to run the company, but I could just see a way that I could help my on-site teams understand what they need to do better if I could articulate the financial piece and educate them. And he sort of said, well, honestly, you're qualified now with a bachelor's degree, but in order to sort of get your start in the business, I would recommend that you go get your master's degree. So I did that while I was working and graduated from the University of Tennessee with the express goal of wanting to get into asset management. And lo and behold, one of the large equity players in our space who had done about 20 deals with the management company that I worked for at the time said, "Hey, I've hired all of these kids straight out of Vanderbilt. They can tell me that there's a financial variance, but they have no idea why. So could you come and lead the asset management team," which is a huge step straight out of graduate school, and went to go work for Covenant Capital Group and Rick Scrolla, and was there through 2008, when we all know was the beginning of the Great Recession, and had some personal stuff come up that really required me to step away. My father had been diagnosed with cancer. I needed to go help him with his business. I sort of took a step back, and then I said, okay, well, like, what do I want to do now? I want to work with great people who do great things every day. Like I had that space in my life to sort of say, okay, this is going to be my next step, needs to be with people I like doing stuff with. Didn't matter what it was. Specifically, my mother sort of pulled me aside and said, "Hey girl, you need to get real. Because I know you keep talking about other stuff, but we're sitting on a beach in Puerto Rico and you're telling me everything you would do to each piece of real estate that's here." Coming out of that rehab reposition background. And I was like, okay, you're kind of right. I do love it. That sort of led me to seek out opportunities in Nashville. I sort of tell people the story that I wrote 5 letters to who I thought were the best 5 companies in our space and heard back from 3 of them within a few weeks. And that started my journey to get to know the people at Bristol Development Group, where I have been for 15 years. The past few years, become a partner in our firm. So I'm really appreciative for that and those opportunities that have been given to me, and rewards for hard work. My role has changed over time. When I started, I was sort of the direct asset manager over our operating assets. We had at one time in our history as a company had our own management company, but as '08 sort of occurred, realized that that really wasn't a great synergy use of our time or expense that we wanted to keep incurring, which is why they brought me on to sort of oversee the third party management piece. In the past 5 years, I hired somebody that I mentored who started her career working on one of our sites when I was first joined with Bristol. She had also, at my encouragement, gotten her master's degree and joined us as the director of asset management about 5 years ago, and took over those responsibilities to see the day-to-day oversight of the operational assets. As Chris mentioned, I'm sort of a utility player on the team. I do a lot of stuff, and we're a small group. We're only 17 people in our entire company. And I always make the sports analogy that we're kind of like a basketball team. Each of us has a role that we can play, but all of us are going to keep trying to win. And we can definitely pass the ball if we need to. I do things from upfront design, decisions, as Chris sort of mentioned in his intro. I'm focused on not just is it pretty, but is it going to work? And what are the practical realities of all of that? It can be gorgeous, but if nobody uses it, then it kind of defeats the purpose of spending all that money on it. So I work hard on the front end with that. And then I also sort of do what I'd call the handoff from construction to operations. And that's why I'm here in Santa Rosa Beach today. We're nearing the end of construction. It's the time to ensure that our product is meeting our expectations, and then pass that off to the operations team who begins the lease up. I hope that answers your questions, Adrian.
Sure did.
That's awesome. And we met, if I'm not mistaken, at a developer conference, I believe, many years ago. It might have been 7, 8, 9 years ago. And you have your hands on the pulse, like you said, of technology, but not just on the operations. You're thinking all the way from development, right? So I'd love to hear kind of your thoughts of your approach, kind of how you're thinking about strategic planning, how you're keeping your fingers on the pulse when you're oftentimes building a building years out and got to make decisions up front. And as technology is changing faster and faster, like, are you thinking about the technology, I think, on the development? And then maybe how do you think about how that affects operations, considering you tend to hold the assets, and how that might be different from a developer who buys and sells? Is there a different approach there?
Oh, yeah. There's all kinds of different approaches. I would say I love to tell this story that I had somebody I worked with who was a regional vice president for operations for a third-party management company that we used. I got to know her pretty well over a couple of years, and she's in the northern part of the Midwest. And I sort of kept suggesting to her that maybe her calling was more in our role in the asset management side of the house. And ultimately that's what came to pass. And she's overseeing asset management for a private REIT. And she called me up one day and she goes, "Lisa, I never knew that I was going to be a futurist." And I said, "Oh yeah, that's a huge part of the job." I said, "We got to be thinking about what's going to be happening 5 years from now, 10 years from now. We got to understand it. We need to be educated about it." To your point, Chris, one of the reasons you see me all over the place is that I'm trying to learn, like, what do I need to be thinking about? What do I need to be planning for? And whether that's a technology conference, an operations conference, I'm trying to understand where are things headed. I often spend time with people in the low voltage community, trying to understand, like, what are we thinking about? Where do we think we're going to wind up in 5 or 10 years? Because that's really generationally the life cycle of construction. It takes me 5 years to buy a piece of dirt, draw the plans, build the building, and then deliver it. And I know there's fantasy fiction about less time and 3 years. That can happen. That can happen with an expedited product. It can happen in some certain situations. But the reality is it's more like 5 plus. So I think about what I call future proofing. And so how do I make sure in the design process that I'm thinking about what can accommodate things that are coming? And from a technology perspective, that means I think one day I will not need all of these wires in my building, but today I do. And as long as fiber is delivering the best experience to my residents, I want to make sure I have that, agnostic to who the provider is. I'm thinking about, well, do I leave conduit in place for things I haven't thought about yet? For example, a Google fiber deployment, is always something that I'm thinking about. It might come on down the future pipeline in some markets. I'm also thinking about, well, this is what I have today or that I'm going to deploy when I open, but I'm cognizant of Bluetooth technology advancements in the experience product, and now I'm seeing more and more people offering sort of Wi-Fi in-home solutions from a service provider perspective, like a Verizon or a Comcast, and everybody seems to be sort of fighting in that space. But what do my residents really want? Because that's sort of the other technology piece. Everybody in the world, talks to me about how much they want, let's say, green initiatives. They don't want to pay me any more money for it. So, okay, I can put all the tech in the world in a unit. If somebody's really not willing to pay more rent, and I think there's segments of the population that are, and then there becomes what I call the adaptation expectations. I tell this story about our project we did in Chattanooga. We had 3 service providers we brought to the property because we were big into customer choice, and this is what our customers told us they wanted. And so we had a traditional deployment with AT&T and Comcast, but then in Chattanooga, there's the local utility company offers high-speed internet access through a federal grant, and they were trying to become like a tech hub. 80% of our residents, that's all they bought. So I made no money on any sort of revenue share with the big boys and girls. And I spent a whole bunch of money getting all of them there. And so that was sort of a lesson learned about what does my customer really want? And I need to plan and be prepared and make sure that I'm delivering to that expectation. And now it's an expectation with everybody just streaming that that's what they really want, the high-speed internet access versus video deployments.
Lisa, with your extensive experience in property management, what are some key lessons you've learned that still influence your approach to asset management today?
I think one of the things that distinguishes us from our competitors is that we're better, faster, stronger, smarter. The fact that we're a small team makes us quite nimble. So it doesn't take us several days to turn the ship. We can make a decision rather quickly and deploy it. Now, that frustrates our third-party management companies sometimes because they're bigger than we are. But it provides a strategic advantage in our ability to react to what's going on around us and the speed at which we can affect change. And whether that's market conditions, concessions, understanding if we're going to need to make a fundamental capital improvement expense to have a better resident experience, all of those things we can act on much faster, I think, than our competition can, because there aren't layers of approval processes that need to take place. Again, as a company of 17 who highly respect one another, if you're playing that position, we want you to go try to make the goal.
Staying with third-party management, that's what you're using for your assets, right? You're not
Yes.
self-managing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'd like to ask you a question. What are some things that you're looking at when you're hiring a third-party management company? How do you vet? How do you pick your third-party managers? And do you have a preference for like just one third party managing all of your assets, or is gonna be, do you prefer two or more, or is it market specific? Just walk us through your like thinking. I'd like to see how your process works.
Sure. So to answer the big question first is we don't believe putting all of our eggs in one basket serves us from a fiduciary responsibility perspective or from a competitive market environment perspective. So when we're thinking about, and I can use Jacksonville as we've just deployed an asset there, we're looking for the best in class in each market. So we go and we do our due diligence. Who is managing more than one piece of real estate? One thing that's really important to us, because we're not there every day, is that there's what I call bench strength in reserve. So, if there's an emergency or there's a crisis or just somebody needs help, who can come to the asset that's there locally? I'm thinking highly about that. I'm thinking about lease-up experience, because lease-ups are very different than running a stabilized operating asset. And you don't have the time to educate somebody on doing that unless there is no other choice in a market. That's really just something we're going to like put high on the ranking list and the evaluation process. And of course, this is something that I think is pertinent to all conversations about real estate. It's about relationships. Who do we have relationships with already? My selection in Jacksonville is somebody that I have worked with when I worked at Covenant Capital Group. She's with a different firm, but I know her and she knows me. She knows my style. She knows how I lead. And that comfort level there put them at a strategic advantage over another competitor. We're looking for how people feel about them in the workplace, because ultimately, if we sell an asset, the people who work for us would hope to retain employment with that same third-party management company. Perhaps it's on a different site. And so how are they perceived in the market in terms of long-term longevity and working for them? We're looking at reputation. We've never actively sought out or sought to entertain sort of somebody that didn't have at least a good reputation. We're not looking for the best of the best in everything that we do. We've got to manage that with all of our other expectations. We're also looking for financial reporting back of the house. That's part of our evaluation when we're thinking about management companies. We have several institutional partners, and so their expectations regarding financial reporting are pretty high, and some of those entities get audited. So we need to make sure that when we're entering into a new relationship, it's very clear and established and planned for upfront. Those are probably our big, like, top 10 things we're thinking about when we're sort of trying to pick who's going to manage our real estate for us. Thinking about the future, thinking about the benefits of AI. Obviously, that's going to influence our space and the operations and asset management long term. I don't know what that's going to be, but for now, I choose to think about that as an assistive tool, and that I'm sure that will morph and change over time. I'm also aware, much as he talks about, that there's going to be some hiccups along the way, and that nothing is perfect in its deployment. And so, like many other things that are innovative and groundbreaking, it'll be a process to get through. And I'm hopeful, as he is, that it'll be a positive change in the end for all of us. What else? I read all the time, whether it's the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. I love to read books, and that's primarily in whatever I'm interested in. I know that one of the things that I've always found instructive is giving myself space to pursue those things that interest me, because while it may not have a direct effect, it often has influence over what my ultimate decisions are going to be in terms of, hey, we should try this new idea. I saw this at this hotel, or I saw this art piece at this museum, and they approached it this way. And so, what if we change our perspective a little bit and engage with an idea from a different direction? So, those are all things that regularly I'm trying to keep my mind open so that I'm ready for change, which is inevitable. Planning for the future, if you don't leave that space to accept new ideas and new processes, then you're behind the eight ball. And I think a lot of bigger companies, to answer your question from earlier, Adrian, make that mistake.
I want to ask a question in reverse. Typically, I'm interviewing a lot of third-party managers, right? And the question for them is, when you pitch business to an asset manager, what are the things that they share with you that they keep them up at night? So now, Lisa, what is it keeping you up at night that you want for somebody, a third party, to be qualified, to be ready to take that 3 a.m. phone call from you when the situation requires, in a case of an emergency? What are some things that really concern you when you're thinking about, hey, we're not like self-managing, we don't directly manage the asset, it's somebody else out there doing it on our behalf? What are some things that worry you?
Sure. So my director of asset management said that early in our relationship, I said these words to her, which are true. I know I said them, but this is, call me fire, flood, or blood. I can help you with all three, even though I'm not your direct supervisor. And I can't do very much about the last one, but I can at least tell you who to call to get a hold of to help you. And so, those are the things that I sort of call it reflex skills, that like the more you train, the more knowledge you have, the more you can show up and be present in a situation that is difficult and challenging. And I have that bench strength. And my hope is that my management partner has that bench strength. But sometimes they're not available, they're not as accessible. We always tell our folks that if you need help, we're here in a crisis. So those are the things that distinguish us as an owner, number one, because you're probably not going to get that same thing from an institutional third party asset manager. And number two, it creates a level of trust between us and the third party operator, that we're here to support you in case there's an emergency. I worry about other things that don't keep me up at night. Rising cost of insurance, interest rates, all of those sort of strategic, long-term things I can do nothing about, sort of items. But the loss of sleep is really sort of making sure that there are no loose ends or undotted I's that would result in some sort of liability, and that we manage any sort of unforeseen circumstances to the best of our abilities.
A good part of our followers and individuals that are actually watching us, they're joining us, our friends, are from the supplier side. Typically, an asset manager that uses a third party kind of like hands that over to the third party to pick the vendor partners, right? So it's a twofold question here. First of all, how much of an involvement do you want to have in picking the vendors for operating the properties? And second part of the question is, even if you have very little to nothing to do, when you are looking at a service provider, what are the things that, if I'm on a service provider now and I was having an opportunity to pitch some business to you, what are some things that I should tell Lisa to impress her?
Okay, I think that's a great question. And I'll start in a multi-layered response. And that's to say that if I tell you it's all the third party manager's decision, I'm saying that because I'm tired of hearing from you. And you're absolutely right that I likely am never going to come to a third party property management company and say, I need you to use this painter. But I have influence, and I can encourage you to explore opportunities. I can encourage you to get bids. Or I can say, hey, we painted the whole building with Sherwin-Williams. We have to use that paint when we repaint the building because it's not going to match if we don't. And I just use that as an example, how we can specify things in our design process that then become a part of the building and then become part of the regular maintenance and ongoing operations of the asset. For example, like an HVAC specification in the design process for the cooling and heating units for each unit. Sometimes we go through experiences of sort of saying, we learn by our mistakes, where we think we've picked something better, and then we find out from the operational end that the maintenance on that thing is 2x what it is on every other sort of standard multifamily piece of equipment. And until we have that experience, we don't know. But we're always, I think, one of the other things that make us an exciting asset management group is that we're willing to try new things. We're willing to experiment and learn from those lessons. As far as a pitch, because I know that was the second part of your question, whoever continues to use AI to write me emails, I block them now because they're exhausting. Okay, there are some third-party vendors who send out not just constant contact communication, but daily, did you see this? Did you see that I have toothbrushes and that they're $2 and you need toothbrushes because I know you brush your teeth. It's like that level of incredibly invasive and pervasive communication that's a big turnoff. So if you want to know what not to do, that is item number one.
And now a word from Dean Fungawing, founder and CEO, Kairos.
I started the company in 2017. We spent 3 years in research and development, talking to multifamily owners, talking to commercial real estate owners, getting feedback on pricing and the technology and how they want it to work, talking to maintenance teams one-on-one. And it wasn't until 2021 that we actually launched product. And from our very first customer to now over 15,000 multifamily apartments, I think we'll be in over 30,000 units after the end of next quarter. It's growing very fast. And all of our customers, about 100 properties that we're in, not a single customer has experienced water damage post installation of our technology. We've seen a quick ROI, and with thousands of sensors, not having any insurance claims post installation is kind of unheard of in this space, right?
Item number two is that we need to be respectful of each other and each other's time. Either I'm interested in pursuing a relationship with you or I'm not, and we can talk about that and communicate about it. But it helps you to come with some sort of relationship perspective about who I am and what I do, to understand what part of the process we might interface on. And by that, I mean cold calling, emailing, stopping by my office, hoping to find me when I'm usually somewhere else, like here in Florida, is not going to get you that first rodeo. But if you meet me at an IREM lunch or an apartment association event, that's going to open the door for you to have a more collegial relationship with me and begin those conversations to be like, hey, if you ever need any painting, I'm around, I'm local, and here's what I have to offer.
Lisa, the next question is going to start with a preamble. I'm going to start by saying that the challenge that I've seen in us on the operations side getting qualified maintenance talent is the money that we can afford, that we're budgeted to pay. What I've noticed is that for the most part, individuals that are the numbers, the money people, right, deciding the budgets and everything, they're numbers. They have a strong financial background.
Yes.
It's very hard. It's been the biggest challenge for me to make the case that maintenance cannot be seen just as a cost. And everybody knows what happens with it. You first control it, trim it, or eliminate it, right? But there's a lot of value into, what a great maintenance team, a great maintenance professional, an individual can bring to an asset. I want to ask you to help me to make a better case for why we should pay the maintenance better. What are some things that, we could bring to the table as far as added value? Because I could just bring you a number of things right here. You do better work, you're going to be proactive versus reactive. You catch things ahead of time when they're minor. You're not going to have floods overnight and so on and so forth. I could go with this argument, which, you probably know all those arguments already. But what are some things that, maybe some angle that I'm missing when I'm making the case for maintenance and for us being very aware of what your industries are paying so we could grab the best talent that's available out there?
Well, first of all, I'm not one of those people who's going to tell you not to spend the money. But when I make my case to my leadership and my partners, which is to say, hey, look, first we need to deal with the reality that wage growth, not just in a sector of our business, but in our industry and competitively in other industries, we're talking 20 to 30% in 1 year's time. And then now we're adding 3 to 5% every year after that. So I said, what we underwrote 5 years ago when we started this deal, we need to throw it in the trash, along with the insurance numbers. And it's personal because there's people involved. And we talked about some of the secrets to our success. One of those things is that we understand how important the people are. And that's because we came out of operations. And so we don't look at it from a financial analysis standpoint. Although we know other people do. And I have a great story to tell about that. And then I'll answer your question. So it is the beginning of COVID and everything shutting down. And one of our major acquisition partners, somebody who likes to buy our real estate, called our founding principal and said, I am saving 20% across the board on all of my assets. And so immediately he gets me on the phone, wants to have this big conversation with this buyer. And in the back of my mind, I thought, well, there's only one thing that's going to help you get 20% savings immediately. And it involves the people who work on your site. But I didn't say anything. So we get on the phone, and sure enough, their great business plan was they were going to lay off at least one person from office and one person from maintenance because it's COVID and people are losing jobs and it's great. And I said, okay. We hung up and he came in my office inside and says, that's totally unreasonable. I said, well, not only is it totally unreasonable, everybody is at home and they all want things done to their apartment now. And oh, by the way, they all paid rent. I said, so we have a captive audience and we're going to reduce goods and services. Great. That's a horrible business plan. So as long as we are not suffering from some economic financial crisis that is impacting our resident profile, we need to go ahead and pivot to thinking about how can I make this the best experience possible for my residents, which then triggered us as asset managers to say, how can I make this experience the best that I can for our staff and our team members? Even though they don't work for me, we wanted them to feel heard. We wanted them to feel cared for because we were in uncertain times. We immediately hired Dr. Debbie, who's a personal friend and my mentor, to give everybody essentially a cheerleading class for, an hour about yes, we don't know what's going to happen, but here are some things that we can think about positively that might help us navigate through this tenuous time. So that's how we approach the people piece, and it does distinguish us from our competitors, and I believe it gives us a strategic advantage. Now, how do you make your case, which is really what you asked me, but I wanted to kind of lead up to that answer. I always start with facts, because analytical people understand facts, and that would be to document wage growth in the particular market and how that looks year over year to emphasize here's the competitive environment in which we are operating. And I go pull information from other publicly available listings for competitive positions at like kind assets and say, this is what a maintenance supervisor makes now. Like, I'm not just asking for this because I think that this person is special. So let's first do a financial analysis response, because if that's what gets their attention, then we can respond to that. Then I think, I like to talk about the emotional, intelligent part of the equation, which is that aside from fixing things, because if this was just merely a fixing things conversation, we could have the Uber of maintenance solutions developed and deployed in a matter of hours, where we could just call somebody to fix a leaky sink. This is a customer service journey. It's an opportunity, to your point, to prevent things from happening. And there is value that can be assigned to that. And we can do a statistical analysis of what the impact of a leak would be. We, by the way, just to tell a little personal story about one of our assets, had a leak that happened over Christmas Eve, affected 24 units, took us a year to work out resolution with the insurance company in terms of getting it repaired. And I was the first person that could come and respond to that issue because it was the holidays and I happened to be home. And we had a manager on site who worked for a large national multifamily third-party operator that just needed some guidance. And so, again, it's sort of that responsiveness from an asset management perspective that distinguishes us. I think making your case to spend the money is about not just the repair, but the people component. Interestingly enough, I know Chris knows that I was at NAA Apartmentalize this year and spoke in front of the education committee. And one of the things their research is telling them is that the number one things owners want is better customer service on their assets, because they understand that that leads to improved NOI. I think it's understanding how to influence people to have the positive income or outcome that affects the NOI. That's also a very strategic element of how we choose to do business, although I know a lot of other people don't choose to see things that way. But if I have to make a purely financial case, it's about anticipated savings, customer service, and bottom line, that they're able to repair things that we would have to call a contractor out, and it would be 2x the expense.
You mentioned earlier the situation with the gentleman that found a solution to eliminate a couple of positions on each side and save 20% on payroll. I want to ask you something that's not necessarily related, but I think a lot of companies are actually trying this because they're thinking this is an opportunity for us to operate better and actually save on a human component. And that's centralization, right? Centralization is one of the hottest topics. I wanted to ask you first, do you think that the centralization is actually a real thing at an institutional property management level? Is it just a buzzword? Is it a combination, like somewhere in between? And what's your personal take on centralization? And especially, well, I won't say especially because, it applies to, both office positions and also outside to a maintenance position. So I want to let you speak on that.
So I've been hearing about the fantasy of centralization for about 3 years now. And when I push, and the big boys and girls, they're like, well, we're trying it in this market, and it's only if you use this software, and it's only if you agree to do these things, and it might save you 10% on one position. Okay, we're not talking an across the board payroll sort of deduction. I will say where I think you could make the business case logically to me that might be a good idea would be in the back office piece, which would be the assistant manager role in my mind. The administrative component to that does not require a lot of in-person, although it can, depending on the asset profile and, the rental payment. But, I think you could do a bulk of that piece of the work from a centralized location. I come back to the customer experience, and we are not pioneers in the centralization idea. There are huge individual or big owners of single family homes that have essentially a centralized operation by which they lease these homes and they maintain these homes, but they don't have an office for each home. The response time is slow. The experience is not great. You understand that from the get-go. It's sort of like, okay, well, I've got to schedule an appointment. My residents' expectations aren't about that. Now, understand there's some asset classes where that may be different. So I'm going to provide less and save a little bit of money doesn't seem to align well with brand new multifamily development construction type assets. It's sort of like showing up at the luxury hotel and saying, okay, well, I can't check you in right now, but if you come in 2 hours later, there might be somebody here that can help you. And if they're here, they're going to be running here from somewhere else, and they're going to be tired, they're going to be hot, they're going to be sweaty, and the experience is not going to be great. Well, I would love to think from a financial perspective that we will make strides in that arena. And I definitely think that we will make strides in the AI piece of potential solutions to troubleshooting, communications, and interaction with residents. I think the people piece being centralized, I think we still got a long way to go before we get there.
Lisa, I want to go next to take a question from the audience. The question comes from Jason Biskov. And the question is around stereotypes. The stereotype is asset manager knows the numbers and sits at a desk. Property management company does the work and is not as good at numbers. This causes friction and stereotypes stink. How can asset manager and management company work better together?
I would say, and this is a great question, Jason, because we're working on setting this up for ourselves this year now, which is that we are getting ready for budget season. And budget season is a great opportunity for everybody to sit down together, preferably in person, but it can be done virtually. And it could be at your request. It doesn't need to be at waiting for the asset manager to make that request. Say, I'm ready to present this information to you. I want to go over why. It's important for me to explain my thinking behind my numbers, to develop some respect between both parties, if that is the financial piece challenge that's missing. To harken back to my initial experience I was telling you about at Covenant, people could tell me that I bought 6 cases of toilet paper. They couldn't tell me why. They were over budget for those 6 cases of toilet paper. But if I talked to the on-site team, I could quickly figure out that it was COVID and we needed toilet paper. And
You're going to get anytime soon.
Right. And so we were panic buying and it was appropriate. So the why goes a long way. Creating space to communicate the why is what I would seek out an opportunity for, whether that's on a site visit or a budget presentation, which I would push for. I just think it helps build trust and create value between both properties. So there isn't that friction, or there's less friction. There's always going to be some friction, but that there's less friction in that relationship.
Lisa, I want to go to inspiration. And my question is, who is the person that had the most positive impact in your life and career? And if you have 2 of them, right, one for life in general and another one specifically for your career, then you can name 2.
I was like, well, I don't know that I can lead to just one. I'm going to start with my grandmother. She helped raise me. She grew up during the Great Depression. She was what is lovingly referred to now as a Rosie the Riveter during the war. She had grown up on the eastern seaboard of Maryland and married a military man and got to see the world. My mother grew up in part in Greece, where my grandfather was stationed. That led to all kinds of different cultural exchanges and experiences because of that background. She was smart. She took care of herself. And she always inspired me to get an education and continue seeking educational opportunities. She said, education is the one thing no one can take away from you. And that had been her life experience, having gone through the Great Depression and having sort of climbed her way through different economic circumstances, that was her inspiration, both to my mother and myself. So she's a huge force in my life and a great inspiration to me. Professionally, I could name 2 or 3 people. Beverly O'Neill Copeland hired me into the business. She was my bi-coastal example in Tampa. She lived in California and came back. She is brilliant and creative and really inspired me to make my mark in the world as a woman in real estate. And so I owe a lot of respect for her for giving me the chance to get into this crazy business. I always say that I have my bachelor's degree in business. I have my master's degree in business from the University of Tennessee, and that I have my PhD in real estate from Rick Sproula. But I don't really have my PhD, but he taught me everything I needed to know about how to think about deal valuation, financials, the impact of eliminating operational expenses, but doing so not in the sense that we took something away, but that maybe we made an investment in something else that allowed for that. And my best example of that, to give a real life comparison, is that we buy upfront coffee machines for each of our assets that we own and that we maintain. and that we just in bulk from an operating perspective buy the beans and the necessary powders for it to make coffee, which eliminates an ongoing expense of about $1,000 a month. And so it's that creative thinking of, well, what can I buy to make something better, and not just taking that thing away. Yes, I need to have the carpets vacuumed, but can I buy a carpet vacuuming robot versus having that human focus on that when there's other things that they can add value to me to do? So it's that sort of strategy that he informed me about that had really impacted my career. I could keep going, but in the interest of time, I'm going to sort of roll it back a little bit.
You had an outstanding career. There's so many that are looking up to someone like you. They want to be Lisa one day. What are the best pieces of advice you would like to share with those that are looking up to someone like you?
So one of the founding sort of elements that I tried to continue to embrace, is that fear is the mind killer. Like, in sport, we always talk about that, like, the only limitation you have is what you think you can't do. The body's physical strength is much greater than we believe it to be. If you put limitations on what you think you can and can't do in your mind, that's exactly what's going to happen. I always sort of talk about my career path is not linear. I did not go from the beginning to where I am today. It looks more like this crazy squiggly line that goes all over the place. And knowing that and not being afraid of that is what has kept me striving for any professional goals that I've set for myself. It's kept me engaged with understanding, how do I get there? It may not be the most logical, straightforward path to get over that obstacle. I may have to go around. I may have to go underneath. But I'm still going to try to reach those goals that I set for myself, whether that's educating, sharing my knowledge with others, which is sort of my focus over the past few years. I think it's great to inspire people to do more. It's aligning yourself with people who are in positions that you want to be in. As I mentioned before, Dr. Debbie is a big mentor of mine. We met by chance through another person. And then how do we keep that connection alive? And how do we help each other? Do you need something that I have? She was looking for budgets information the other day. Or can you throw your support behind me because I'm interested in pursuing this volunteer opportunity that I presented for at NAA? What is your feedback? I think those are important, engaging, opening conversations to have with people that you admire and respect if you're putting yourself out there, because I think that can be life-changing in its information and structure. And never give up, because if you want to do more, there's always space for you to create that opportunity for yourself.
Lisa, one of the things that I'm thinking about lately a lot, it's legacy. We're only around for a limited period of time. Some will argue for a short period of time. How would you like to be remembered? What would you like your legacy to be?
First and foremost, I would love my legacy to surround education and creating opportunities for education and engagement and enhancement. I love to mentor others. I love to find opportunities to connect, whether it's sharing information or getting together with small groups of people just to sort of brainstorm about what's going to happen next. We try to do that on a regular basis, at least once a year, with some asset managers, just to sort of think about, like, hey, what should we be thinking about? What should we be planning for? Like, we definitely need to be planning for more electric vehicles. We don't really have the infrastructure in place to do that. So, sort of like, bouncing ideas off of others, making things, a priority in your education is one thing that I hope people remember me for. I'm also deeply involved in a nonprofit called Entryway, which is, we have I think 8 or 10 branches now throughout the country, an opportunity for us to find ways to help people who are transitionally homeless, not chronically homeless, but people who find themselves, whether it's from a life change situation or an illness, in a situation where their permanent housing is threatened. We look to find them opportunities on site that provide them both with a job and a substantially discounted housing opportunity. So in Nashville, we've done over 20 placements, and we find people in veterans court or, transitioning out of the military, in domestic violence shelters, who find themselves sort of in this uncertain living situation. And we provide them both with a job and with, again, a deeply discounted housing so that they live on site and are able to get to the job without fear of transportation and all that other stuff. I hope to continue my legacy in that regard and highlight that work in our industry, because I think it's a great way to solve that people piece that we were talking about earlier without spending a whole lot of cash money, but then providing a housing benefit to those who are in need.
Lisa, as we are approaching the end of this amazing conversation, I want to give you the opportunity to share some final thoughts and maybe answer a question you wish I would have answered. I didn't, had the opportunity to.
So one thing that we had corresponded about before we met was leadership style. And I had this great story to tell about that. Early in my career, somebody said, your leadership style is like Joan of Arc. And I was like, at first, a little scared of that information. But came to understand that there are 5 tenets of her leadership style. And I was like, yep, that's me, and that's to clearly communicate your vision. Because I think one of the things that we fail to do in our industry is tell people where we're going and why we want to go there. So always communicate your vision. I think that's a really critical and important piece of great leadership. And one of her hallmarks, great leaders open up new territory. Through her crusades, she was looking to expand the empire. And I always think that you can't, again, let fear be the mind killer. Try new things, do new tests on your side, see what works, see what doesn't work. Great leaders put it all on the line. I always say, I won't scrub a toilet. I won't ask you to scrub a toilet that I won't scrub myself. And I think that's really impactful in leadership. That if you see me willing to take the time to spend with you, not just to ask you why you bought the 6 cases of toilet paper, but because I'm genuinely interested and want to understand, that changes the dynamic in the relationship. Building trust is one of the tenets of her leadership style. You got to trust that I'm going to take you in a place that's safe, and that my crusade may take us over here, but that we're going to go there together, and I'm going to be there with you, and I'm going to support you the whole way there. And then, of course, to focus on the future. You got to think bigger than where you are today and examine, how you're going to get there and lead with confidence. And so I wanted to cover that, which is not asset management specific, but I think impactful and important. As far as asset management questions that weren't asked, I think I've sort of highlighted that asking for feedback is incredibly helpful, both as a third-party supplier or management company, and not being afraid to ask those hard questions, even if you're a little uncomfortable. Sometimes the other person is just relieved that you've opened that door to have that conversation, because it means that you trust them with having what I'd call a crucial conversation that may help you.
Lisa, it's been amazing having you here today. If someone in the audience wants to reach out to you, what are some ways in which they could get in contact with you?
Sure. Well, I'm on LinkedIn. You can message me. I'll be happy to connect. We can spend some time together. We can email. Our website, bristoldevelopment.com. My information is there, how to get in touch with me, email, telephone, all of that good stuff. And of course, I'm on social media on a limited basis, but primarily through the website or LinkedIn is probably your best bet.
Thank you again for hanging out with us this afternoon, Lisa. Amazing conversation. I want to thank you all from the audience for making this, very much alive, asking great questions. I hope to see you back here next Thursday. We're going to have here Jesse Miller. He comes from Hawaii. He's with a Greystar, and he has, so many great things to share. I want to thank our sponsors, Kairos and Coastal Painting Contractors, for making this broadcast possible. Again, I'm Adrian Danila, your host, signing off right here. Have an amazing afternoon. See you next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, as always.